All right, we are live. And today we have a special guest, Christina Babin. I hope I'm saying it correctly.
Yes. Yeah, Christina Babin.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, Eric?
I'm doing fine. Now, I want to introduce you to everyone. Christina reached out to me with a very interesting story. Obviously, I do talk to cult experts and I've talked to somebody in Scientology, things like that. And Christina has a story. You have a story. And I'm very interested in it, but it did actually give me pause when I read the email, and I spoke to you on Friday about this, and I actually talked to my audience on Friday beforehand too in another live stream. But one of my concerns, and I want to get it out here too, is this. I guess I'll just call them a cult. I don't know. That's a legal loaded term, technically, but this organization that we will refer to as a cult because it's allegedly a cult is quite troubling. There's some incredibly dark stuff here.
Yes.
And out of respect for you, it can get really salacious. Now, there are, to me, your standard fare cults that like to scam people out of some money and things, which are horrible and all of that. But I am almost more comfortable with that in some ways than a lot of what has gone on in this cult. So I want to be very careful to not re-victimize you from being in there.
I appreciate that. And I really appreciate what you're saying, because one of the reasons that I am speaking out is because it is such a salacious story, and there's a lot of stigma around survivors of this cult. We're kind of the dirty little secret of the world. We were failed by, social services and by, America, by the FBI, by the CIA. They failed us. And our story makes people very uncomfortable. It's not a fun cult. And, we say sex cult, and there's this idea that people have that, like, if you're going to make a Hollywood movie of a sex cult, there's orgies everywhere and beautiful women running around and parties. And it wasn't like that. There was nothing truly glamorous about it. And it's uncomfortable for people to talk about. But I feel it's necessary to talk about this subject and to talk about our story. I think it's worth telling. And if we don't, we're kind of in danger of revisiting this again with other groups. So it's a difficult subject, but I think it has to be talked about.
Okay. And also to let everybody know, I'm not monetizing this video. If you want to do super chats, that's fine. I appreciate it. I don't know if I'll be able to get to it timing wise or whatever. I do not want to interrupt the flow of the story. And I want to give Christina as much space as humanly possible. I feel like, Christina, you're in a unique position, or not unique, but an unusual position in the sense that you were, in essence, born into it. I consider 1 year old. You were not cognizant enough to make any kind of choice.
No.
Or have any knowledge. So that is a different stance than what we often see, which is somebody who gets recruited into it and has a living. And everybody is a victim, no question. I think that the different perspectives are interesting, and I'm very curious what life was like for you, because you had nothing with which you could compare.
Yeah, it really is. I liken it to being an alien from another galaxy. All of the fundamental things that kids in society grow up in, even within different cultures and different countries, for us didn't exist. So nuclear families were discouraged. Kids were taken away from their parents. If you lived with your parents, you were told, don't give them special treatment. Everybody here is your parent. The lines between parents and lovers and uncles and aunties and everything was mixed. It was all jumbled up. And so coming out into the world, it's like it's a totally different environment, and you literally have to learn how to think for the first time in your life when you leave this group or groups like it. Making decisions is so difficult. I'm far along in my recovery, but I still, if I'm under a lot of stress, sometimes it's difficult to like think, what do I want to do?
When did you leave?
I was around 21.
And that was, I don't want to age you out, but I was just going to ask you what year you left, not how old you were. So sorry, I messed that up. But
no, that's okay. I'm 47 now, so yay, I'm an adult.
Okay.
So I believe it was 1997, perhaps.
Okay.
Around that time. Or maybe it might have been around 96, 97.
Okay, so it was after Berg had passed away in 94.
Yes. And, one thing about this group is that there were, I kind of liken it to different like decades. The cult would change. And so there were, after David Berg passed away, the group changed again, changed its name, changed its policies, changed a lot of its doctrines. So you have people that have been in it from the beginning all the way to now. There were people that were in it for, 10 years and then the next 20 years. And so a lot of people are coming out now. And so you're hearing a lot of different stories. Some of the younger generation, like my younger siblings, they didn't experience a lot of the things that I say we were the guinea pigs, us older ones. When David Berg was alive, things were really, really bad. And Karen Zerbe was part of that, and she promoted it. But once he passed away, she tried to have the group become a lot more legit and a little less salacious.
Okay, now, so let's go back in time just to, with that detail, what was your childhood like? I mean, from my understanding, you didn't really go to school. So what was it like growing up as a little kid?
Yeah, so there really was like no such thing as like a childhood. We read and studied with the adults. We worked with the adults. We worked to raise money and to take care of our siblings and the younger kids. So you did a full day of work. You got up in the morning, you prayed, you spoke in tongues, we chanted. You were assigned your duties. And if you were cute and really social, then you were one of the kids that got sent out to beg on the streets.
Hey, what is speaking in tongues? I want to back up. I've always heard the term, Pentecostals and everything else. For some people, what exactly is
so that? It actually is, it's kind of part of a mind control or a thought reform tactic to get people to chant, because chanting kind of, I don't know the neurological reasons for it, but it can actually help you breathe heavy, and you basically go into a different altered state. And so it makes you more pliable. So you'll actually find a lot of cults that do some form of chanting. Our form of chanting was mostly speaking in tongues, which is just a made up language. And each person had a different one, and they had the same one. And so as you got to know people, you could actually kind of recognize like, oh, that's Uncle Sammy, oh, that's how Auntie Sharon talks in tongues. And you just made up your own. And it was just and you just go on and on and on for hours. And, you kneel on the floor. It was a public activity. You all did it together. You were all required to do it. We did a lot of that. That was like morning and night group activity. So
now, what was your mindset? I'm curious, and I hate to dig into every little detail.
Dig.
When you're speaking in tongues, are you kind of like just playing? When you're a child, I'm thinking that might actually be kind of fun. So I don't know.
Yeah, actually, that's kind of a good point. So we weren't allowed to think or daydream. If we were
Mhm.
walking around, we had like little books with scriptures that we had to be reading. If you got caught like looking out at the window, you were like, what's going on? What are you thinking about? Are you praying? And then if you admitted to thinking about something, then you were in trouble. So you had to keep your mind shut off. So for me, and I'm sure everybody gets a little different, but prayer time was daydream time. So there was so much repetition that even people's prayers were repetitive to me. I was like, oh, I know what Auntie Sharon's going to pray about. I know what verse they're going to say. So I already had my script memorized. You'd have to go in a circle, once the chanting was done and prophesy. So I usually, for me, I just quoted Bible verses and that was my prophecy. But yeah, that was a time to daydream and think about things and imagine places I might go or things I might do.
And what
Yeah.
were you imagining?
Not probably not what normal kids did, but just maybe having a dress or walking outside. Nothing major. I mean, nothing. You didn't think about things of going like to an amusement park but little things like, oh, maybe I'll get to go outside today, or maybe when I'm out on the street, somebody will give me some candy, and you kind of relive memories that you had or experiences that you might have had while you were out begging. And you kind of hold on to those and you cherish them, because somebody passed you a little piece of candy, which was completely illegal, and you'd get in trouble if you were caught. But little things would happen.
Now, did they work with you? Like, one thing I've found, like, when discussing other organizations, there's a snitching culture.
Yes.
So you mentioned like somebody might give you a candy. Did you have to keep this a secret yourself because your peers would snitch on you? And did you find yourself having to snitch as well?
I tried really hard not to snitch. I hated snitching, but it was part of not only our culture, but it was required. You had to confess every night. You had to snitch on yourself as well as other people. You had to report back what you did that day, who you talked to, conversations, and that was nightly.
Did you plan this out? I'm curious on that, because now it's like I'm just trying to think of myself in that position. So if
yes, I planned it out.
Okay, so you said, oh, here's a good snitch thing. This will get me only in so much trouble. So you would kind of find, because you had to give them enough dirty or enough information, but not enough to be really a problem.
Yes, but I don't think I was the normal kid. For some reason, I was very observant, and well, I never really disbelieved what they were telling me about the outside world. I saw that there was a game being played, and I decided to play it. So for me, it was very easy to strategize. How do I not get in trouble? I figured out pretty early you could not confess. You had to confess. So the trick was, how do you confess just enough to where they go, that, but you're not locked in a closet or isolated or beaten or...
Would they do that?
Oh, yes. Physical punishment and isolation was very common. Yeah. The punishments were very harsh.
Did you have any friends who suffered more than others through it?
Absolutely. Yes. I watched the kids that, first of all, really truly believed and trusted the adults got it the worst. The kids who had the biggest personalities got it the worst. So I actually have a big personality and but I worked very hard to suppress it and very hard not to show it. I did not trust anybody, so I got in less trouble, whereas they would say something to somebody else or wish out loud, like, oh, I wish I could go skating like those kids over there. So I would try very hard never to say that kind of stuff, because you're not allowed to wish or want anything other than what you're doing.
And where was your mother during this? Now, I know you were kind of passed around, from what I understand, all the kids are sort of, but where was your direct family?
So when the cult first started, children kind of lived with their parents in communes. Sometimes you travel in between a commune and just be with your family while you're working to get to the next commune. I think it was the 80s, they started doing taking the kids away from the parents and like having them. They started with like having them sleep in separate rooms, where all of the 9 and 10-year-olds were together all the time, and all the toddlers were together, all the babies were together. You didn't take care of your own children. And then the older a kid got, then they would start sending them to different communes. So I lived predominantly with my parents when I was little. And then between 11 and 12, I got shipped off to a training camp, and then with my older brother. So it was actually very cleverly done. They had these specialized training camps that were supposed to be fun and exciting. And we were supposed to since we
Summer
were,
camp.
yeah. And since they were very honest about that, they wanted us to give our lives to the cult of our own volition. They wanted us to dedicate ourselves to it. So this was our chance to show, I'm an adult now. I'm going to give my life to God just like my parents did. So there was a lot of similarities with maybe other religious camps, except it was very, very strict. And nothing horrific, just a lot of indoctrination, a lot of thought reform was hammered into us in these camps. And then this was hundreds and hundreds of kids. In these camps, there were, I think, 4 of them around the world. So then all of those kids that went to the camps, they sent them out to other communes and did not send them back to their parents. So then at that point, we were just trafficked around the world, sent from commune to commune to be used.
I'm going to interrupt for a second, and the chat's going crazy. Like, what is this? What's going on? This is the Children of God cult. It is also known as, or became, the Family International, which is beyond creepy because Charles Manson had the family too. And yes, this is the same organization that had River and Joaquin Phoenix and Rose McGowan within. So
yes.
Just so everybody in the chat knows, I'm wanting to know definitely, and to go back. So tell me about your camp, your training camp. Like, I mean, you show up one day. What happened? What was it like?
Yeah. Okay. So there were 2 kinds of camps. So one was the one I'm talking about. Later on, we're going to get into what I call the prison camps. So they had this one idea. It kind of worked for a couple of years. We started rebelling again, and then they sent us to more intense ones. So the first one, I don't know if you've read Robert Lipton's book, Lipton. It's Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, right. Totalism.
Yeah, it's out of North Korea. I know that.
Yes,
I haven't read his book, but I know the material through Rick Allen Ross and everyone.
Yes. So he studied POWs, Korean, that were Americans that were held in Korea, and kind of focused on mind control. So he kind of listed out 8 things that thought reform programs have in them. And I really found them spot on. And for somebody, it's amazing to me, somebody who didn't live it actually was able to kind of comprehend it. I think he was a genius. But the first one of the 8 is the milieu of control, and which means your surroundings. And so all cults do this. They control your surroundings. They control where you go, who comes in and out of it. And then it escalates to what information comes in. So this camp was all about, controlling our environment and not giving us anything to think about except for the cult doctrine. Every single day we woke up to an anthem that was played. And it was an anthem of dedication, dedicating our hearts, dedicating our lives. Are you willing to die for Jesus? And so that was played every morning when we woke up. We marched in rows. We sang. We sang and we danced around fires, and we really bonded with everyone. So you're not allowed to have friends, but you can bond, you can hug, you can tell each other you love each other. It's just, so you kind of get this like these hyped meetings that are just a lot of clapping, a lot of chanting. You're smiling a lot, you're hugging each other. So you're bonding with the group. And then you're just
Very active,
in classes all day. Yeah, yeah. And
they keep you busy. You're not, doesn't sound like you're bored.
no, we were never bored. Yeah, no. Well, I mean, our minds could be bored, but not at the camps. So a lot of us left the camps really dedicated to doing a good job, to being adults now that we were 12, just giving our lives to the cult. And
now, at this point in time, sorry to interrupt. At this point in time, you believe in all this, right? I mean, it would make perfect sense that
yeah,
part of the program, you grow up, this is the world. So
yeah.
Because I definitely want to know how your mind, what you're thinking and feeling as you go, because we're living vicariously through you.
Yeah. So I was pretty much a believer. I kind of like always rubbed a little, like the structure and the control rubbed against me a little bit. But overall, I believed. And more importantly, I think I believed that the outside world was bad. And because we were always running from the police would chase us. A lot of times we were, in countries illegally or doing things we shouldn't have been, proselytizing on the street when it was illegal. So we would see the police chasing us. Since we were out on the streets begging for money, people would spit on us or molest us, or, we were kind of in a bad situation, So I was like, yeah, maybe the outside world is not that great. Maybe we can't survive out there. I was just so indoctrinated that there wasn't a lot of time to think of, do I really question this or not? But what happens to a lot of people...
You don't have competing material either. So, I mean, I don't blame you. It's not like you could just go pick up a book on, hey, Robert Lifton's book's over here. Go ahead and read it. No, it's not available.
Yeah, that's the milieu of control. And that's why that tactic works so good. And I think it's very clever of him that he made it be the first one, because if all your information is controlled, they have a lot of power. And when I say information is controlled, I mean no newspapers, no TV, no books, no conversations with outsiders that are not scripted, that there is not a witness standing there with you. And then afterwards, you're going to go back and you're going to, what do they call in the military when they debrief? Debrief. You're going to go back and you're going to debrief. And if you were too curious.
Debrief. And whoever's with you is going to be debriefed too. So you better be forthright, because somebody's going to snitch.
Yeah.
Snitch.
Yeah. So everything is controlled. And so you're kind of just in survival mode all the time with no information. And I say no information, but I was one of those where I was like, if I walked by a television, I was going to like laser it into it. Like, what's going on that TV? It's moving. What are they talking about? I would rip magazines that I would find places, rip out a page, go to a bathroom and read it, and then flush it down the toilet.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was very naughty. I was very naughty.
No. I mean, that's fascinating.
Yeah. At one point, I got a Walkman, and this was in the early 90s. I got a Walkman, and we had cult music we could listen to. We weren't allowed to listen to any outside music, Christian, anything, classical. All of it was evil. But it had a radio on it. And so like I had a little piece of tape that I kind of put over it to hide the radio part. And I would sneak and listen to the radio. For some reason, it was Kenny G. And I was like, wow, this is some sexy stuff. I don't know, I must have been around like 17 or something. But I was like, ooh, what is this? So that was just, I was always sneaking and doing stuff. But if you got caught, the ramifications were huge. So, but that kind of just shows you how humans are very curious, and it's hard to suppress that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and you can't look every minute all the time, but I think of, we're not that far apart in age, and sadly, when we lived in a time where you could be more independent and we didn't have as many helicopter parents, but at the same time, information can be suppressed a whole lot more than it can now.
Yes.
There's a lot more out there. And
Yeah.
it I think harder and harder and harder to hide some of the stuff. And that's why
Yeah.
you see many people leaving large name organizations, aka Scientology, etc.,
Yes.
because it's hard to hide from the internet. It's hard to hide from
Right. Yeah.
everything.
I believe that was kind of one of the downfalls of the Children of God in the form that it was. When eventually the world started catching on to the abuse, and while the authorities, for some reason, did not think that the doctrine was enough, they wanted to walk into one of our communes and find children hanging from their feet with bruises all over them. Well, we trained too good for that. They weren't going to find that. Even the children were trained for these scenarios.
That's hard. That's hard, though, because you do have freedom of religion, like here in the States, and proving, having the, justification. You have to have probable cause to get in, and people aren't talking. And
in general, I'm gonna agree with you, because I'm all about freedom. I'm borderline libertarian. I'm like, yeah, I want freedom of speech. However, when the doctrine itself is saying abuse your children, spank them until they can no longer cry, because crying is a manipulation. Do you know how much you have to spank a child before they stop crying?
Well, until they get the break and become sociopathic, a while. Then over time, then they
Well, and I just mean physically in that moment.
Sure.
They're probably unconscious. So these are things that Father David said to do. And we're not even going to go into some of the more horrific stuff. So these were written documents. These were things that the cult was putting out. This was our doctrine. Then you have hundreds of people leaving saying, this is real, this happened. And we're saying this is not enough. Now, some of it is because there's not a precedent for this. We're used to having a certain kind of evidence like photographs, and we don't have that. But what do you do when they're preaching this?
I'm surprised they didn't have an undercover. To me, that would be a good candidate to have an undercover agent or two. But then you were all over the world too, and that factored in, right?
Yeah.
Like, you forgot to tell us where you were when you were growing up.
Yeah. So I was in. It's funny, actually. My earliest memory was being in Jamaica. And we actually got kicked out of Jamaica because the Jamaican government, they came to our commune, they raided it, and they said, "You're CIA. You're providing guns to our people and siding with the rebellion. You need to leave." And it's so funny because I've looked back at that time. The CIA actually was doing that during that time.
I'm wondering, when you just said that, though, is it possible that David Berg may have? No, I'm just asking, because the CIA had some very strange bedfellows, if you will, and they protected some people unaccountably.
Well, I think that's a really good question. And the fact that no matter what David Berg did, he never got in trouble. I'm like, you can't follow the money. You can't follow, thousands and thousands and thousands. Who knows how much money? You can't follow the money. It's kind of interesting. But I think that it's interesting. But either way, so I was in Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Mexico, Canada, Hawaii, Guam, Japan, Korea, the Philippines, Guam, Saipan. Yeah, and within those places, we moved constantly. We were constantly on the run. You were personally moved all the time. We actually were a very secretive group. We had a beautiful front-facing group. Like, our storefront was immaculate. We were taught to smile, to sing. We did mock court cases. We trained on how to speak to outsiders. We were trained and taught that the outside world thought that we were abused. And so here's what you say. Here's what you do. So we were taught this thing, it was called deceivers yet true. So it's okay to lie to outsiders. It's not okay to lie to the group, but you have to lie to outsiders because they are the enemy. We call them systemites, just like, other people call them subversives or whatever. Our term was systemites, and a systemite was, an enemy. So it's okay to lie to them.
Formula. There really is a formula.
There is. Yes. I know. You have to wonder if they all like studied together and then got together and like, kind of like swap stories, but we don't know. Cults, there's a hierarchy, and most of us are on the bottom. And so the very top, you don't really know what's going on. And most of us never saw David Berg. We didn't know what he looked like until the day that he died. So even if his picture was out in the world, we didn't know because we weren't allowed to see it. Growing up, they did cartoons to show us what he was. And I'm going to show you one of them. Yeah. So this is, here he is.
Wow.
He's look at those muscles.
Yeah.
He's cool.
He's
a cool hipster. He's a cool guy. He's not like those systemites. Well, when I finally saw him when he died, I was like, so underwhelmed. I was like, he was scrawny and old and just, he wasn't rolling up his sleeves looking all hunky. We were yeah.
That's the illusion. Within a couple of years, you're like, I'm out of here.
Yeah. And all the women were like wanting to have sex with him and fantasizing about it. And like, I had a dream last night. I had sex with, they called him grandpa or father. And I'm like, well, that's creepy. There's
videos out there that was not only occurring, that was encouraged, and videos were set from it, and I'll say consensual-ish. I mean, there's mind control involved, so it's hard to say consensual, but it was very, very weird having like a husband and wife or a couple. Yeah. Well, I guess because nobody's really married to anybody. You sort of are, but you're not. It's all very, very confusing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And so the videos that you see are also propaganda. That was David Berg said, have your beautiful women send me stuff. And of course, they all put on a good face. And there were some people that were dedicated and loved it. Most people I saw in the cult didn't love it. They were doing stuff because they felt they had to. And you could tell women would get in trouble and get publicly shamed because they didn't want to participate in the sexual sharing. And we would all get together and shame them, as a group until they did what the leaders wanted. So you had a lot of people not doing that because they liked it and they wanted it. Most people did not join for sexual reasons. They joined to fulfill this great purpose of saving the world and getting away from American capitalism and, all these lofty things. They didn't join for those reasons. That's
a really good point. And I wanted to go into it with you as well, because I've had like Ian Haworth on and Rick Allen Ross. And you just said, because they have all these lofty things and anti-capitalism stuff, that one of the primary recruiting grounds is, quote, do-gooders, or people who really want to change the world.
Yeah.
And do you want to go into that a little bit?
I do. So first of all, and it's interesting because even as kids, we were trained to look for this. There's not one type of person that joins a cult when it comes to career or education. It's not a bunch of drug addicts. There's doctors, lawyers, hippies, ballerinas, whatever, all kinds. The thing that does seem to be in common is that they were in a place in their life where their purpose was what I call weak. They had weak purpose, meaning they were switching jobs, getting divorced, broke up with the girlfriend, lonely, not sure about going to college. Whatever their life purpose or the thing that they were excited about has kind of like faded. Yeah, so they're in a liminal space in their life. And so the cult comes along and it really speaks to somebody's narcissism. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's like, it's like charity narcissism. Like, oh, I want to just save the world, and you have these ideas in your head, and somebody comes along and says, here's an easy way to do it. You don't have to work really hard. You just become part of this group, and by default, without becoming doctors without borders, you can just become part of this group where we love you and we hug you, and automatically, bam, you are saving the world. And I think if you're kind of like needing a goal and you're needing a purpose in your life, like that's so tantalizing. I do kind of feel like we still need to study more, but I think you probably do have to be a little bit of a flexible thinker to be talked into this. But a lot of people are. That's not a bad thing. If it's lined up at the perfect time in your life where you're in flux, you're in a liminal space, you're open to new ideas, you're dissatisfied with your life, your parents, your family, whatever. And then you're offered this, I call it the Deus Ex Machina solution, which is from Greek theater, where they would swoop in at the end of a story, and it didn't make any sense, but this God would swoop in from the machine. It means God from the machine would swoop in and end the story fantastically without any reason. And everybody's like, yay, yay. And I want to say it was maybe Socrates was like, oh, this is lazy storytelling. So basically it's, we watch movies where there's a lazy ending, like, bam, all of a sudden magic happens. So people who are like, I guess a little more open-minded, they can be like, oh, I can get a hold of that. I can see that. I can see that if I join this cult, bam, magic is going to happen. And one of the reasons that I think that in order to be duped by a cult, I'm sorry, you do have to be a bit open-minded, because if you look at the second generation, like all the kids my age, we almost all abandoned it and left and did not, once we hit like our teenage years, all of a sudden we weren't buying it anymore. So how is that possible when we were given so little of the outside world, so little information, nothing but this thought reform? To me, it says there has to be something in you that accepts the thought reform. If you are fighting against the thought reform, ultimately it's not going to work. So I think there's a little bit of willpower that we kind of haven't looked into yet, and I'd love to see some studies about that. But there's thousands of us that all, when we hit our teenage years, we were like, I'm calling bullshit on this. And how is that possible when our parents weren't? And they had lived in the outside world.
That's a fascinating point. Now, but while you were calling bullshit on it, you were also recruiting people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because you're calling
there has to be a cognitive dissonance in this.
Yes. I don't know. I think I might push back on that a little bit. So you're calling bullshit. I remember being a teenager and starting to call bullshit on some of the fanciful doctrine. Like, I believed and was told I was going to be a superhero. I was going to shoot fire out of my hands. I was going to, all I had to do was be a prostitute for the cult. But in the end times, I was going to have superpowers. I could fly. I could do all these things. And at first I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'm like so powerful. And it's I'm kind of looking at my hands and like, oh, is there any, is it hot? Is it hot? Is it coming? And, the older I got, the more I was like, yeah, I don't know about this. Just didn't seem, it was too fanciful. However, the stuff I didn't call bullshit on was the outside world. I didn't see how I could navigate living outside the cult. The only people that were ever allowed in our compounds from the outside world were Johns. So I don't know if you know what a John is.
Of course I know what it is, yes.
Some people don't. So the only people I ever saw coming into our environment that were allowed in our homes was a John. And the Johns were nice. They were always, I loved when a John came. They would bring food, snacks, everybody kind of smiled and was like happy, and
That's,
and they sometimes cracked jokes or sang songs that I hadn't heard. So to me, it was like, ooh, kind of cool. But other than that, there was no close relationships with outsiders, with grandparents. It was like, so I bought, because I saw proof, or because I didn't see proof, I don't know. I bought that we had to stick together and I couldn't leave. And that stayed with me. It stayed with me, and to this day, I still sometimes feel like an outsider. I feel like a foreigner. And I listen to other people's stories of their childhood and what they've experienced and just how they look at things. And I'm not on the same place as them. I don't understand. I
want to revisit something that you
I'm
said.
sorry?
You said something that's pretty striking. Essentially, that the Johns brought joy while you were technically all being abused.
Mm-hmm.
This place is so dark that the people who were essentially being prostituted out got joy from the customers who were doing it. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. There's no, I just said absolutely. Sorry, Scott. Yeah.
Sorry,
Think about you. So we weren't allowed to go out and oh, no, I was talking about the behavior panel. They always say, like, if you say, if you say, absolutely. But our life was so structured, and the only joy that was allowed was joy in the Lord and joy at doing your service and what you had to do. There was, sugar was not allowed. No, you didn't watch TV. You weren't allowed to do competitive sports. You weren't allowed to choose what you were. We were not allowed to buy food. So everything that came into our home had to be donated. If we couldn't get enough food donated, we had to go into the garbage cans and go look for food. So when a John brought food that was like, pizzas or whatever, you were like, wow, yay. And the John may not have even known that the woman was married. Who knows what they thought or what they were told. I don't know that they even
Did marriage really even matter there, though? From what I understand, there was so much swapping and swinging and whatever.
So traditional marriage was not allowed. Romance was not allowed. I personally never witnessed a single wedding ever. And if you got married to somebody, that was actually really hard, because if you didn't agree, then they would take that partner away from you. And so they'd get sent to, and they would test you too. So they would take them away. So personal connections were very discouraged. It was a lot of arranged marriages. If you were in love, you kind of had to keep it on the down low. You didn't make a big deal about it. And then there was a schedule for sexual sharing. And so you would get to a commune, and every night, you're with your husband this night, and then you're with Uncle John and with blah, 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 blah. And a lot of people didn't like it. This was not fun. This was not like a bunch of swingers hanging out, having a good time. You would see one or two people having a great time, and then you'd see other people crying in their bedrooms. You'd see, husbands just like, ugh, and I would watch this and see wow, some adults love this and some hate it, but I was really thankful when I started seeing adults paying enough attention to, oh, some adults don't like this, just like me. And I was like, okay. Because up until that point, I thought, okay, I'm kind of a weirdo here. I'm not really into this. What's going on? I'm not loving it. And then I see adults and I overhear and I see women getting in trouble for not sharing. And I'm like, oh, okay. The thing that we forget, while us kids in the cult, we had it the worst, and especially us older ones. Some of the younger ones never experienced anything more than the thought reform, than the extreme control and lack of education, but they didn't experience all the forms of abuse that we experienced. But kind of forgot where I was going with that. I guess, I know where I was going with that. Our parents and the adults in this cult, they were duped. So like, you know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So we've got our pyramid, you know?
Hi, Greg.
And I was so happy when I found them because, man, like they're talking my language. So exciting. I want to talk about that later. But so a cult offers you the bottom, right? Like right off the bat, you're going to have your basic needs. You're going to have food and shelter. So you come into our group, you got that part. And that's solid. Well, everything else, you're duped into believing that you're getting that. You're getting your esteem and your love and your belonging, and then that self-actualization. You're sold this. We're giving you all of this. And it is the biggest con ever. But that's what our parents were sold. And because of all the thought reform and these 8 things that they were doing to convince them, that they were just falling for the con over and over again. You have belonging, you have love, and it's just a sick and twisted version of all of that. It's like living in the upside down world.
Have you ever read up on hazing?
No, but I do know of it.
I kind of, hearing about this and thinking about it over the weekend, it came into my mind that there's a hazing element to this.
Oh, absolutely.
And by that, what I mean is that there's a reason that fraternities haze and sororities. And this goes back to, there are tribes in Africa who do this. And it literally, the hazing mechanism is something bad, uncomfortable, whatever you want that you go through, but then everyone else around you goes through it. So you actually are bonding through this abuse. And I'm throwing it out there because I know you're very deep and wanting to read on it, but I'd be interested if you think it all over, if the hazing angle may actually help enforce some of this, because like the same way all these fraternity brothers are brothers for life, or I was in the army, and a lot of people in the military, they're forever together because they went through basic together, they went through this together, they went through that together. Is there a little bit of that with you?
Yes, absolutely. And this is one of the reasons I like you. You're, I don't know what you call it. Like, that's good. The fact that you got that. I'm going to raise you one even. If you've ever been in the dating world, they tell you one of the ways that you can bond with a date or a partner is by doing activities that are dangerous, that are outside of your comfort zone. Going on a roller coaster, going bungee cord jumping. If you do that with somebody, you can bond in a way that you wouldn't if you were having coffee. And so that goes all the way down to just a date. So if the stakes are even higher, and I've watched these, let's call it a hazing session where somebody is rebellious and they don't want to do whatever the cult wants them to do. We go down in the main living room. We all surround them. They kneel on the floor. We put our hands on them. We do our chanting. We're all putting pressure on them physically. We are rebuking evil spirits. We're rebuking their pride. We're yelling. It's intense. People are sweating. When that person breaks and they start crying and they beg for forgiveness from God, David Berg, whoever, then guess what happens after that? We grab that person. We hug them. We're like, Auntie Sharon's back. We're hugging her. We're all kissing her. We're all happy it's over. She's going to be yielded. She's going to go up to the leader's room that night. He's happy. And we're happy it's over. And we've all hugged her. We've all affirmed, like, it's over now. You've repented. Like, it's intense. It's very intense. It's sick and twisted, but it's intense.
Wow. And here's the messed up thing is I can actually see you getting the dopamine hit out of it. And feeling the genuine, somebody wrote trauma bonding, which is probably a great term for that.
Yeah, that is.
I have to know, and I know I'm jumping around by doing this, but okay, you've left. I know you have children. I think you are married. This has got to play hell with any kind of what would be seen as a normalized, because nobody's
Mhm.
normal, but we'll just
Yeah.
say neurotypical, or commonly held relationship. How has this been for you for relationships? It has to be kind of
Yeah.
difficult.
Well, romantic relationships, that is, I am divorced. I don't think because of that problem. We were married for 23 years, but no, I do carry, I don't know what you want to call it, like scars. But one thing, I really appreciate exposure therapy. Um, Maybe because of those dopamine hits and throwing myself out in difficult positions. But really, for me, speaking about it, I think one of the first things for me really was like having a family and having children. I never wanted to have children. I never wanted babies. The idea was just horrific to me. I just, you know, and then of course I had my first two in the cult. And I looked at my first baby and I looked down at her. She was a couple days old, and I realized like it kind of just like dawned on me, she's a person and I could treat her like a person. And this was a very rebellious thought, but I was like, like, she's in my hands. And makes me want to cry. um,
Did they separate you?
No, no. They tried to separate me from my husband, and they told him that they were going to take care of the baby, but he said no. And by that time in the cult, they had calmed down a little bit on some of that stuff. But I realized like that I had a choice, and just seeing her and seeing how little she was, and realizing like, okay, I have a choice. She's a person. And so then basically everything that I thought I needed or didn't have, I wanted to give my kids. And so I just kind of, it was a very healing experience for me, was just, I'm basically like a big kid. So I'm like, yeah, let's have a mud fight in the yard. Let's bake chocolate chip cookies. Everything that I never got to do, I got to do with my kids. So
Awesome.
that was just amazing.
So you live vicariously through your kids.
Oh,
So that you
absolutely.
kind of join them in childhood after a
Yes.
fashion.
Yes. And I still do. I'm very young spirited when it comes to just life. And I go to therapy. There's definitely, there's always going to be healing to be done. And, but I think that's okay. I haven't met or found anybody who doesn't have issues that they have to work through. So my goal is not perfection. That was kind of the cult's goal. I don't want to beat myself up. I love life. I'm enjoying it. So I'm good. And there's dating is difficult and weird for me. Telling people what I want is hard. Like, it's hard to even admit what I want. So it's very difficult. I'll circle the block sometimes when I'm like, oh, I need to go eat out, and I'll just circle the block. I can't make the decision of where I want to eat and what I want. Like, it's just really tough. Things like walking outside of my front door. I remember the first time I walked out of the front door where I didn't have to ask anybody permission, and where I got to go by myself. And that was when I got out of the cult. My husband had taken the children out to the grocery store, and I was home alone. And I walked to the front door, and I opened the door, and I walked out, and I got in the car. I was 21. I'd never driven a car, but my husband had been teaching me over the past couple of weeks. He's like, you have to drive. That's what we do out here. And I got in the car, and I started like, outside. I'm sorry?
He was an outsider then.
Yeah. So he was looking at joining. So he was going through the recruitment process while we met. And once he was through the recruitment process, he was like, yeah, this is not for me. But we met and fell in love. And then he spent 2 years trying to get me out. And I kept telling him, like, we cannot survive out there. We can't leave. And he couldn't even comprehend what I was saying. He's like, yes, we can. What are you talking about? I'm like, no, we can't leave. And if we do leave, they will not let us back. And he's like, so? And it just, we never really quite, like, I don't think he ever got it because he's very independent. But yeah, so I was driving down the road and I started laughing like a crazy person. I had turned the radio on. Some stupid American rock and roll song was playing, and I'm driving, and I was out in White Castle, and the sugar cane was super high, and I was just driving down this little country road, and there was dirt, coming up off of the road, and I'm driving, and I felt like such a badass. And I looked down at the dashboard to check, how fast am I going? I was going like 20 miles an hour. And I was like, okay, well, not a badass. But then I was like, I had this weird urge to drive and to keep driving. Like for a few seconds, I was like, I could literally keep going and never stop and never come back. I could just keep going. And
they never after you or anything like that, or they just weren't that way?
Well, we were out of the cult at that time. This was me out of the cult.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This was after
you actually break free. I mean,
I was 21. How did we? So basically what happens is they don't physically keep you once you're 18.
Oh, okay.
So before you're 18, they will tie you up, lock you up. They'll do all kinds of horrific stuff to you to keep you in before the founder died. Now, after the founder died, a lot of that stuff changed. But I had watched so many teenagers run away only to be returned by the police, to be locked away, to be put in solitary confinement for 6 months and beaten. I was like, unless I knew that I could survive, I was never going to leave. I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to go through that. I knew I couldn't survive outside. So when he convinced me to leave, we went and stayed with his parents, and they were normal. They had family dinners together, and they all argued. They're one of those they're very loud, and they say whatever they want whenever they want, and they kind of like argue and sort of yell at each other and then break out laughing. And to me, it was chaos, and it was scary, but I was fascinated. I was like, what is happening here? What is going on? I couldn't tell if they were like, I mean, is somebody going to die? And then they would start laughing. And I was like, okay, I don't, but I loved it. I was like, this is crazy. And I kind of sat on the outskirts, and, it took me a long, long time. It wasn't until I was 30 years old that I was able to admit in my own head, in a complete sentence, that I grew up abused. I was 30 years old, and I was sitting on the front porch of my house, and I was watching my 4 children. They were playing in the mud, and they were just complete little mud monsters. Every inch of them was covered in mud, and they were slopping the mud at each other in their swimsuits. And I was laughing, and I was watching them, and I thought, this is awesome. I never could have done this when I was a kid. And then I was like, what would have happened? Oh my God. I grew up abused. To like, what they were doing was so horrific, and the cult that would never be allowed ever. So that was the first time I admitted it. And it's been a long, long recovery. Everybody thinks, oh, you get out of a cult and you're free.
No. And
it's not like that. It takes a long time. Why am I just speaking out now? It takes a long time.
I had a Scientology person, and it took him years of therapy, and he's doing a podcast series about it himself. YouTube.
Good.
So that definitely helps. And actually, on that note, Gavin Stone, who's a regular here, is asking a legitimate question. Would you be willing to come back for another episode with more of a Q&A from the audience as well? Because obviously I've dominated the time and not let them get any questions in. And I know they have a lot of questions for you. I would be willing to answer some questions. Yeah. So there's a lot more story to tell. We're only halfway through. which is great. I mean, I definitely want to hear it, and I don't want to rush it. So sorry. I get excited and I interrupt. One thing I do want to talk about before I leave,
I think it's something that's applicable to everybody that either goes through trauma or is just living their life and trying to live their best life. But it's one of the things that has helped me the most. And it's understanding the principle of locus of control. And so, you know, psychologists have found that like the more your locus of control, locus means like where, like, you know, like a location where your control is. So the more your control is within, the healthy you are. The more you are controlled by the outside, the more you struggle. So what that means is like learning how to take responsibility for yourself, learning that no matter what happens to you, you have some choices. Like you can be victimized. You know, let's say you're walking down an alley and you get mugged. You know, something terrible happened to you. You can say, okay, how can I make sure this doesn't happen again? I'm going to go take a jujitsu class, you know, or I'm going to carry some pepper spray. I'm going to not walk down that alley again. You have control of your life. And that's one of the things that when bad things happen to you, if you can kind of like center yourself and go, okay, how can I control this? What is the outcome from this that I want? As opposed to the world is bad. People are mean. They're going to hurt me. I can't protect myself.
Right.
That may be true in that moment, and bad things will happen to us, but we can control to a certain extent the outcomes of these things. And so that's something that I still try to talk to my kids about. To myself, I have to constantly say, you know, when something bad happens, I have control of what I'm going to do with this.
Right. How you react. You determine how you're reacting to it, whether you're a victim, not a victim. And no, that's, if you're going to have one thing out there, that's not a bad one.
Yeah.
I mean, if you say, oh, I'm going to focus. Well, I mean, sometimes you can only seize on to one thing. And that's a really good one to seize on to, because you can only control yourself and how you react to something. You can never control anybody else or anything around you. So by doing that, you're automatically shifting it and having some degree of control, especially with your background where you had no control.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is
very beneficial.
Right. But I remember one of the things I think that kept me sane is I remember watching horrific things happen and horrific things happening to me. And I remember thinking in that moment, like, you know, I mean, there's nothing you can do. And I remember telling myself, I'm going to remember this and I'm going to use this for something. And I didn't know what. I didn't know why it was important that I remembered, but I just grabbed onto, I'm going to do something with this. And yeah, like what, 30 years later or 20 years later, I am.
Doesn't matter.
I am not their dirty little secret anymore. I am no longer going to participate by keeping these secrets, by keeping what they did silent. And so that's kind of like locus of control. Sometimes you can't help being a victim, but you can help whether you stay in that position and what you do with it.
Wow, that's amazing. And I know everybody's going to be extremely annoyed, but we're going to push off the behavior panel part. This is called a tease for next time, because there's a lot of meat here, and I want to give it some time to breathe. I want to let everybody watch this. Hopefully comment below, and if you don't mind, please look at the comments too, and ask questions, ask things of us. And yes, it is a horrible, salacious organization. There's a lot of extremely disturbing things we could discuss, but we're not deliberately, because it's just pointless. I did put a link in the description where there's a whole archive of all kinds of disgusting, horrible material that you can find out about the cult if you want to go as deep as you want. Forewarning, is disgusting, disturbing information. You know, don't do it with your kids and all that. It's quite troubling. But on that, I love this being a final message for this one. The locus of control is tremendous, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for giving me a platform to speak, and I love this long form. So thanks.
We'll be doing it soon.